we actually don't really know each other at all, other than just through writing, so our different writings. So why don't you start by telling me more about yourself? I know you were a missionary at some point, but I don't know the whole sequence of events, or so why don't you describe all of that to me, because since that's our point of contact.
Yeah, yeah, and I have similar questions for you. So, even just to start off with, like that word missionary is quite fraught and complicated for me because it's not so clear cut, actually, in my experience. So, I am in Minneapolis, from Minneapolis, and in 2003, my husband and I, with two-year-old twins, moved to the Horn of Africa, to Somaliland, where he had a job as a professor. Um, and the reason we went there specifically, so rooted in Christian tradition, very much motivated by my faith to go outside my comfort zone. And so we were living, when we were first married here in Minneapolis, there's a lot of Somali immigrants here.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so in our apartment complex, all of our neighbors were Somali, or most of them, or Ethiopian Somali from that part of the world. And they knew that we had wanted to live abroad, and they knew he wanted to be a professor. And he has, at that time, he had a master's in engineering. Now he has a PhD in education. And so we wanted to use our real skills set. I was trained as a linguist in my undergrad. Um, and so they said, hey, there's this university in northern Somaliland, which is safe. And um, we had kind of the cover of the community inviting us to come there. They knew we were Christians. And so we said, okay, let's try that. And looking back, I think it was a little ridiculous and foolish. And that's one of the things I think we'll talk about
Yeah.
was that context with young children. But that was what got us there was this relational connection and the invitation. And then also this covering. Those were real deep values of ours. We didn't want to come in and be like imposing anything, but really working with what are your needs? What do you want? And how can we participate in community? So then eventually, like, this maybe is a long answer, but we moved to Djibouti a year later because it actually wasn't safe anymore. And so we left, landed in Djibouti, where he continued to work at the university there as a professor, and then stayed there for 20 years. And so we
Oh,
moved back.
wow, that long. Wow. How about
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, a long
Wow.
time. So my youngest, the one who's out today doing some stuff in Minneapolis, she was born there. And my other two were raised there most of their life. We moved back here in 2023. But that word, like just to kind of, I guess, finish that all off, the word missionary is really complicated for me because we were professionals, especially my husband. I also did some writing, um, professional kind of writing. And so, but at the same time, definitely motivated by our faith to be there and love talking about spiritual things with people. And so, that's like a intersection. And also because of the context of where we were working, the university wasn't always able to pay him. There were other sources of income, but we were funded then by Christians, mostly Christians, not exclusively, but mostly Christians in the US. And so for an American Christian living abroad in a place like that, motivated by faith, the word missionary is kind of the word that everybody would use. And it's the easiest thing to explain to people here. And yet, like my kids had never even heard that word until they were about 12 or 13 years old because dad was a professor.
Hmm, hmm.
And so it is like it's a tricky conversation. And I don't love the word anyway. It's got all kinds of baggage with it. But then, that's just what people would call us because what else is a Christian living abroad?
Right.
There's,
Tell me a little bit about the faith community that you came from. Was it even like, and or maybe you're still in that same faith community. I don't know if you've had any sort of transition, but was it evangelical or was it of it? Because I know Minnesotan, it's a little bit different context than what I'm probably familiar with.
yeah, I was raised Baptist. um, in Minnesota, not Southern Baptist. And then in college, we started going to a Baptist church, which was John Piper's church, which is kind of our
I see. So
institution.
so you did come from an evangelical context.
Very much, very
Yeah.
much. And we was part of that church for a while. When we left, we were still part of it, members of it. And then just uh, over probably the last 15, what is 2025, in the last 12 to 13, 14 years, I started dumping off a lot of the things that I had been told from that particular church. My childhood church was really lovely.
Hmm. Hmm.
It was very different to that church. And by the time we returned, so we could kind of like go under the radar a little bit because we weren't living here, and I could ignore a lot of things that is not great that I was ignoring, but I didn't have to engage because I was so rooted in my community abroad that I wasn't really thinking about things here. But coming back here, um, and because of some of the things I've published in starting around 2018, 2019, um, got into trouble with that community. And
Oh, really? Okay.
yeah, and it was just untenable. I knew that once we came back, I wouldn't be able to continue there for all kinds of reasons. And and then it really came to a head once we arrived back where we were essentially removed and left. And that actually has been quite good for me. It was painful for lots of reasons, but also, yes, this was the right thing to do. It was not a good place for me to be anymore.
Yeah. So let me just say, for anybody who might be listening, if we end up putting this out, so I had seen your name here and there, just I think on a blog called, is there a blog like Living Overseas or
A life
something?
overseas,
Alive
yeah.
Overseas, yeah. I had seen some of your writing there, and then I believe the article of yours that I cited was in Christianity Today. Was it not in Christianity Today?
Yep.
So pretty, that's pretty big name publication. So your name, I had sort of run into your name here and there over the years. Um, but I cited the article in Christianity Today that and then it cited actually, I think you had cited, I think that's how I found the John Piper article, which the John Piper article really struck me, especially because it was talking about basically he says it's fine to you should sacrifice your children's lives for the Lord. I mean, it was that stark. I don't think he minced words at all. And as a missionary kid, that really pulled me up short. And then your article sort of, and I realized the context to Christianity Today is sort of the not so much anymore, but certainly at that time, it was kind of John Piper's world. Like they would publish things related to it. He was not an outlier at that time, I don't think. Um, and so the fact that, and then your article drawing inspiration for that also sort of drew me up short. So I cited your article in the book, and I think my editor actually knew you a little bit, and she sort of told me, hey, you don't hurt her, she's a nice person, like don't hurt her feelings or something. So I actually toned it a little bit down, actually, Rachel, to be honest with you, but I did cite it because I thought it illustrated the point that I was trying to make. And I didn't think anything of it. I think one of the things that that has not only with you reaching out to me, but in other cases where I've written things, people that you engage with, these people are real people and their stories are a lot more complicated than whatever it is you're pulling out of the ether to like plop in something. So anyway, when I got your email, I was kind of like, oh, you sent me a very kind and gracious email, um, and that basically went through some of your story and some of your regrets about that. Why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah.
Um,
Well, one thing, I mean, just to acknowledge, like as writers, we put stuff out there, right? And we need to either stand behind it or acknowledge we've moved on from it. But it is real. Like I did, you quoted me accurately.
well, that's good at least.
I mean, the words are accurate. I will say, and this is part of my response too, I think it's a little bit out of context and almost a little bit misunderstood, which points to a weakness in my writing. Actually, so I take that as a real, like a logical um, gap that I left in the article. So that's my weakness of writing. But also, like, as I was reading your book, okay, so I also don't know you, but I'd heard of the book and very much agree with the premise of it, that there is a lot of this, white narrative and racism inherent in Mission. And so I was reading it and I was like going along, yeah, yeah, yeah. And then, oh, there I am. My words are being used to show this narrative as problematic, which just as a reader, it can be real easy to read a book and be like, yeah, everyone else has that problem. That's not my problem. But then when you see your own words come back at you, whether or not I would agree with the fullness of how they were used, like that meant I could not just shove this book under the carpet and be like, yep, that's right for everybody else. And so it really did cause like a lot of deep wrestling internally. And for that, I'm very thankful. And I think you're so much of what you're writing is right on. Um, which then also caused some reckoning of how have I participated in that? Even if I go back further in my writing, I have been writing. I think my first piece in the New York Times that like kind of blew up my writing work was in 2011 or 12. And so, and I know that I've changed a lot since then.
What was
Um,
that? What was that piece about? I haven't read that piece.
it was a modern love column about giving
Oh,
birth to my daughter. She was born on 9/11, not the 9/11,
right, right,
but
right.
9/11 2005 in Djibouti with a Somali midwife. And so it's a story of a Christian American and a Somali Muslim coming together and having life come out
Right.
of it.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, it made me want to reach out to you and just say, yeah, thank you for making me reckon with these things really personally and deeply. And that particular article, and I went back to read it because I had forgotten about it. Um, I think it was 2017. And then once I read it, I remembered Piper had written that thing. And then Christianity reached out to me and asked me to respond to it. And I did not go back right now to read his article, so I can't remember exactly what I was responding to, but I know the narrative. Um, and I think I looked then at what I wrote and I was like, yeah, I can see how you took that, um, that I was really like kind of embodying his teaching. Um, but I think what I was trying to communicate is that there's danger and unsafety everywhere. But I sort of set up a dichotomy between like, I had a list essentially of here's the issues that we face in Djibouti. And now I was sending my seniors, they're twins, they're graduating and coming back to the United States. And so then I had a list of the dangers and things they might face on a college campus in the United States. And in that writing, I sort of set those two lumps of challenges up as here's what happens in Africa and here's what happens in America. And they're different trials, or almost making the assumption that like one of the things with I know sexual assault on college campus I mentioned. And so setting that up as different would then imply that I don't think there's sexual assault where we were or at the boarding school that my kids were at, which absolutely is I wouldn't say that, but I can see how it came across that way. You know what I mean? Um, and then I was wrestling with as a parent in that moment of sending them back to the United States of like, oh my gosh, actually, I feel so safe in
Mm,
Djibouti.
hmm.
Our life
Yeah.
here is so beautiful. And I mean, Djibouti is very safe. There is sexual harassment, like the sexual harassment that I endured was pretty intense and consistent. But in terms of like violent crime, guns in classrooms, like shootings at schools, um, none of that kind of stuff was happening. And in terms of the loneliness epidemics and phone addictions and isolation and depression and anxiety, which did strike my family, but in different ways than it did in the US. And so there's a lot of things about America that I was feeling. Actually, it's better for my kids here,
And now it's gotten even worse. So there you go.
right? I mean, there's
Yeah,
kids,
yeah.
kids are seeing ICE right now at their schools and they're
Yeah.
driving through tear gas. And so, yeah, I just, in that moment, I remember wrestling with, I actually feel like I wish I could keep my kids here. And so then to see that put in, and like I said, you did accurately quote me, and I did come out of John Piper's church, and a lot of that is stuff that I have been shedding over the years of that kind of teaching of sacrifice your kids. Um, yeah, so it, in that sense, I wanted to reach out to you and just say, yeah, thank you for helping me wrestle with this and exposing it. And it led to some great conversations actually with my kids and my husband and some other people in my community.
Okay. All right.
And so I really mean that sincerely. And also, oh, I want to grow as a writer to see if I can mitigate those kinds of misinterpretations in the future. And
Well,
yet,
we all do that though, like I'll
yeah,
already people, I mean, I've already had conversations about, where again, people misunderstood, and like you can say, well, that's on them, but as a writer, it's all, it's a two-way street kind of thing. And frankly, I probably wouldn't have interpreted your article. I probably would have interpreted it in the way that you intended if it hadn't explicitly cited the John Piper
Mm.
article. You know what I'm saying? Like if you
Hmm.
had left John Piper out of it, then I probably would have interpreted it in a different way
Mm.
than I did, because I think his teaching is really, you know what I'm saying? Like I
Yeah.
didn't, I probably would have interpreted it a different um way because of
Yeah.
that. So that's
Can I just add
interesting.
one thing to that? And just to, this is my own, uh, um, it's not, what's the opposite of courage? Cowardice. This is my own cowardice as a writer and a human, is that at that time we were still part of that church. And so I know that I couch a lot of my language to kind of cover my ass. And so probably there was some of that in there too. And that's something that I'm really trying to figure out how to not do, but it's scary.
Well,
And so, yeah,
let me
go ahead.
follow up on that a little bit, because I think that illustrates a key sort of how missions functions in evangelicalism, that is a missed opportunity. And that is, the incentive structure is such that missionaries don't want to rock the boat of whoever's supporting them. Do you know? Like there's a, you don't want to bite the hand that feeds you.
Yep.
And so therefore I know so many missionaries who actually are gaining a very different perspective than the American church writ large. I'll just say the American church writ large, though particularly the white evangelical church, which funds most of these missions, most of the missionary enterprise in America. And they are actually appalled by some of the things that they're seeing in the American church. And they actually hate the way that missions is sort of, idolized or sort of packaged almost as a consumer product, for the church. Like, oh, this is our, shiny object that we like to talk about, but don't those the missionaries, we don't want to hear from you what you're learning from the overseas that might be uncomfortable for us.
Yeah.
We don't want it to scramble our American categories or anything like that. So I think what you just conveyed really illustrates that. Like you were being supported by probably that church, isn't that right? And you were
Correct.
part of the larger ecosystem of evangelicalism, of which missions is one of the celebrated things. And so you basically, you gave them a nice story. Um,
Yeah.
it wasn't that it was an untrue story. I don't think it was an untrue story, especially from your experience, but it was an aspect of the story that would make them feel good about
Mhm.
themselves. Is that
Yeah, exactly. You are like, that is right on. And that is what happened to us when we came back and why we're not there anymore. That it's one reason we're not there anymore. Because they didn't, the things that we had, my husband and I had learned and come to love and think is true and beautiful, weren't welcome back here. And so when I started to write about it publicly, or when we refused to sign certain statements that were at odds with our new ideas, we weren't welcome anymore.
Mm,
And so, and that did involve a significant financial hit, that we're actually still navigating and recovering from.
yeah.
It's hard to get, like, the job market in the US is
Oh
not awesome.
yeah.
So I mean, it's, you're right, like, because the money is tied up in it, then you shut your mouth. And
Well,
I,
livelihoods, and you still have to, still have to take care of your family, and it's complicated, it's really complicated.
and there are
Um,
things like, I am still a Christian. I still love cross-cultural engagement, but with different end goals and with different motivations and things like this. And so I still value so much of aspects of that life. Um and so I don't, yeah, anyway, it is complicated, but I'm also, yeah, I just am thankful that you're pointing that out because it is so true and common.
Yeah. Well, thank you for saying that. I always say to people, and I don't know that one of the things I worried most about with the book is that really, I think most of my critique is for the American church and just these how missions has fed into this and fed this sort of identity and how they want to see themselves. And instead of, there are missionaries that I critique, obviously, because there's some there's some really bad stories that I think all of us have. And in listening to missionary children, there's some problematic people and dynamics on the mission field. There's no question about that. But I also know and grew up with so many missionaries who really embodied service and kindness and growth and learning from, curiosity
Mhm.
and graciousness and all of those good values that can be learned by from engaging in missions and who are and some of them are doing demonstrably good work and all of those things. So I really but of course it's all what the missionaries are doing and the mission field is all mashed up with the whole American enterprise of what it is and what it has been for a very long time. And so of course you're gonna when you start splashing paint on something, like the paint is gonna go all over the whole thing instead of like
Mhm.
discreetly, this is this and that is that.
Mhm.
um but I've been confronted in many cases since the book came out, of missionaries, usually like you, very graciously like approaching me and saying they appreciated the book, and but then I can tell that there's probably some pain there and there's some hurt there, and then I have to reckon with that, and then I feel bad. I really do.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
I'm sorry if I caused you pain um, that is undeserved.
I appreciate you saying that. I don't, I wouldn't put it on you for causing it. I think you're raising really important points. So, okay, maybe it is you raising those points that pokes at something, but they need to be said. And someone like you who's not wrapped up in it personally or professionally can sort of say some of that stuff because you've got your experience as a child. So you've got that knowledge and but then you can say the things that, like I said, we just talked about, some of us are not able or willing to say yet. Um, yeah, I mean, there's things about proximity and partnership with the global church that I feel like American Christians need to know. And so if it's through mission that happens, that's still really valuable. But that involves more of like the going to learn and coming back as a witness, as opposed to going as a witness. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, it's a different mindset for sure.
Yeah, and so that kind of partnership, it sounds like that's the kind of people you're talking about. And somehow we still couch that or frame that as mission, but it feels like a different thing. Like even right now, what's happening in Minneapolis and how people are coming together and responding and protecting and sharing. Um, I think a lot of that is what we have learned or what we have to still learn from the Black church in America, from churches in other parts of the world. And we learn that by relational proximity. And so I think it is people like whether it's missionaries or TCKs or other expats who have experienced that, who come back with an idea of, hey, this is what I saw in, a certain persecuted context, that this is what the church did to take care of each other.
Mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm.
that to me, like that is more sort of an Acts 1:8, go and be my witnesses, like go and gather what you can from the body around the world and come back with some things we need to learn. And that's where I still find value in it. But I'm kind of rambling.
No,
I'm
no,
not sure
not at all.
where I went
Not at
from
all.
that, but
Yeah, yeah. Tell me more about just yeah, your experience overseas and how did it what was your mindset when you went over, and then how did it change you over time? If you can describe that a little bit more.
um, well, I wrote a book. It came out in 2021. Yeah, 2021, called Pillars: How Muslim Friends Led Me Closer to Jesus. And in that, I tell this story basically of coming from this real evangelical upbringing with, the bridge illustration as sort of the gospel presentation. You're on one side, God's on the other side. There's a big gap between. Um, and then realizing pretty quickly, like, I've been told a lot of things like I'm the good guy. I'm going to be the good Samaritan or the good woman, whatever. I'm going to be the good Samaritan abroad. I'm going to go and do some good stuff, whether it is spiritual good stuff or practical good stuff. And then upon arrival in Somaliland, the first day, I tell this story in the book. Our 3-year-old daughter, she fell off the roof, which in Africa they're flat roofs. And so my husband had gone up this ladder with her to explore the house, and the ladder slipped out and she fell. And she ended up being totally fine. But it was in that moment a very stark realization that we're not here to be the Good Samaritan. We are here in desperate need of our neighbors who we don't even know to take care of us. If we had needed a doctor, if we had needed something, I didn't know anything, um, which is kind of foolish. But and what you address in your book too, right? Um, but so right away, I just realized like I don't even know how to get to the market. I have to walk there. Um, Once I did figure out, like a neighbor came, a woman who ended up being our housekeeper, took me to the market, but I didn't know how to tell like a slab of meat, what's goat, what's lamb, what's beef. I don't know any of this stuff. So it was like right away, my mindset switched from, it wasn't conscious, but it was survival. It switched from I'm here to do something good to I am here totally dependent on the people around me. And because again, we had that covering from the university and really a welcome into the neighborhood community, people did do that. They cared for us really well. And then I started to see, oh, Somali Muslims are wonderful. Like they have deep faith that's meaningful to them. They're served by their prayers and their fasting and their community and their text. Um, And so that started, it just right away, kind of started to shift how I was thinking about all that stuff. And then over the years, so what the book Pillars does is follows these 5 pillars of Islam and ways that my own faith has been transformed by things I've learned from my Somali Muslim community. And some of it I ended up kind of embracing. There's a couple practices that I've really enjoyed, and some of it I was like, that one's not for me, but it helped me think through actually what in my Christian heritage, my long heritage as a member of a 2,000-year-old body, teach me about fasting or about pilgrimage in ways that my evangelical upbringing had kind of not ever really engaged. Like we didn't do Lent,
Mm-hmm.
for example, we didn't talk about pilgrimage, but we have rich, deep histories of this stuff. And so eventually I came around to thinking yeah, my own faith became stronger by rubbing up against people who are different from me. Because I had to figure out why do I believe what I believe? Why do I love what I love? Why am I doing what I'm doing? And can I learn from what they're doing in this context? Yeah, so I did experience a pretty significant shift. I would love to hear how you, well, I guess just some of your story. I mean, it's in the book a little bit of your growing up, but then how did you land on this as a topic? Obviously, I think it's important and a passion. But yeah, tell me more about you.
Yeah, so I actually, and people, some of the criticisms of the book, I'll see people online say something like, well, she's just bitter and angry about her own upbringing. And that's so funny to see that because I actually loved my overall. Kenya and growing up in Kenya, I loved. Any issues I have in my upbringing is more to do with the even American evangelical culture and that sort of dogma. It's not to do with having to grow up in or growing up in Kenya. Although boarding school, that I do carry some scars from going so young. Although I ended up really loving it. The main pain that I carry forward is the grief, which is still with me. And I think it's a very specialized grief that MKs feel because it's a grief of really an entire identity. It's a grief of thinking you know who you are and not being able to continue to be that person and having to basically you basically lose your heritage and everything because it was never meant to be permanent. You've been taken somewhere and rooted only to be uprooted, and that was the point all the time, is that you wouldn't actually belong there. So you belong to a place you aren't supposed to belong, and you don't quite belong to a place you want to belong. And it's just this there's a very specific form of grief in that. But I loved my childhood, and really, I started wrestling it with with the negatives, when I had my children, and as they've grown, seeing them at different ages and seeing the ways that, basically my parents, and I guess this isn't true just of MKs, of course. I think all of us, as we become parents and we raise our own children, we start to reflect on the ways that maybe our parents didn't give us what we needed. And then and reflect on how you want to be different, and then reflect on like how you're kind of repeating patterns that maybe you don't want to repeat. So I don't think that's necessarily unique, but that's when I started to sort of reckon with things. And then it's my my thinking of my childhood and the whole missionary endeavor began to just run into my broader disenchantment and eventually anger, really, with American evangelicalism and just what it has wrought, I mean, and that's the bottom line. The Trump years, um, it had really, I was kind of like, yeah, I'm kind of done with this, but live and let live. And then the Trump years has really like, no, this is everybody's problem. And then I started to see the connections between, missions as the good evangelicalism. That's what they always bring up, whenever there's a problem, especially the Southern Baptists. I mean, that's in their origin story, is like, yeah, we're slaveholders, but we're doing all this fantastic stuff over here. And to see kind of the connections between the good evangelicalism and the bad evangelicalism, and to see how these two streams sort of flowed from the same river of narcissism, really. Um, so that's how I came to write the book. It started out as more of a memoir, and then it became more of it bled more into how I was viewing the current situation. Um, yeah, but ultimately, I thought that people, for various reasons, needed to hear from missionary kids, because
Mhm.
I think we have an interesting perspective on the American church, on America in general, on faith, on just this entire enterprise that we're products of, but not necessarily bought into in the way that maybe our parents are. So I thought people needed to hear from us. So
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
yeah.
It's a- even after 20 years, 21 years abroad, it's a different kind of identity feeling than for a kid. And so that's something I've tried to really appreciate and take seriously for my own kids. And so,
Although I'm sure you've experienced the grief of leaving as well, because it sounds like you really came to love the community and that place and the culture, and allowed yourself to be affected by it. Like, I think it's one thing if you I know many missionaries, or I've seen certainly evidence of, where you just stay sort of floating above. You're reaching down to help the people, but you are kind of floating above, and you don't really let yourself be, because I don't think you can really know love between yourself and another person if you're not affected by them. If
Mhm.
they don't influence you, I don't know that that's really love if you don't let them influence you, like, at all.
Mhm.
I don't So it sounds like that wasn't the case with you, obviously, and certainly in the book that you wrote. um so I'm sure you know this grief.
Mhm.
to some extent too.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. I feel like, well, we were just there last week, actually,
Oh, wow.
my husband and I and our youngest. And so it was very interesting to be back there and thinking about these kinds of things and talking with my daughter about being back. It was her first time back after moving to the US. And yeah, there is a lot of it for me. And I still think it's different because we're literally back in the suburb I grew up in. And so I do have roots here that I can maintain. And yet I don't feel like I really fit in either the way that I would have if I just grew up here. But yeah, so I think there is some of it and it's different for an adult than for a kid. And so it is helpful for me to hear from other MKs to just help me, yeah, fully appreciate and try to ask good questions of my kids and try to understand their perspectives on these kinds of things.
Yeah. How have they processed all of that? Have they processed their grief? Do they carry that? Do they know what I'm talking about?
I think they do. I do wonder what it might be like when they have their own families. If that'll, like you said, for you, it really kind of brought up some of this stuff. Like if that might point to or trigger some things for them. Um, all of them have, as we've talked about it, they've loved growing up abroad, same as you. Their experiences in the country were lovely. They had good friends and meaningful experiences in community. Um, but I think as they grow, they're recognizing ways that they are different from kind of a different sort of American kid who just grew up here. And so navigating that is still something they're working through. But I am really ridiculously proud of all three of them for how they are handling the transition back. And none of them have like a I hate America sort of feeling, which I don't have either. I mean, I just feel like there's no place that's going to be perfect on earth. And like, how are we going to love and have joy and process pain wherever we are? Um, yeah, I don't know if that makes any sense too, but I think somehow that has passed on to them in some way, which I'm thankful for. I love that they're all very globally minded. I'm sure you are too. And just every time they have cash in their pocket, they want to go see something and experience something, and they have a very unique perspective on stuff here that's happening. So I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess I should let them speak for
Yeah.
themselves, not try to talk for them, but
Well,
we have
if
talked
they,
about it.
yeah, I would love to hear from them. If
Yeah.
especially if they've read the book, I'd love to hear what they think about it. They can
Yeah.
send me an email if they want.
I'll tell them that. I'll
Or,
tell them
yeah, yeah.
that. You said something about the narcissism of the American church. And I think that is really also a key point that your book brings up and could probably be a whole nother, I'm sure it could be a whole nother book, multiple books
It
about.
is Dave Verhagen's How White Evangelicals Think.
Well, okay, but is it specific to missionaries or is it just white
No, no, he talks
I-
about the narcissism in white evangelicalism. Yeah.
yeah. So I've read a couple things, like also Chuck DeGroat's When Narcissism Comes to Church.
Yeah,
But I think it
heard of
also,
that one.
yeah, thinking about it in the international context is, yeah. When we were leaving, when we just announced that, we're moving, we'd been there so long, and so several people asked if they could get together with us, other foreigners, and like pick our brains on some of our experiences and stuff. And there was a guy who'd been maybe in the country like 2 years, and he came over. He's European, and so he said, so the local Christian community is pretty divided. What do I do to help them find unity? And my husband and I, we said nothing. And he said, well, what do you mean? And we're like, nothing. And he kind of wrestled. You could see him wrestling. Like, I think you misunderstood my question. What do I do to help the local body find unity? And I said, how's your Somali language? Do you know what's the name of the president? Can you give me a couple folk tales and some historical events? Like basically, how much do you know about this place and this people? And he was like, couldn't answer anything.
That's so
And
classic.
and we were like, okay, so until you've got some knowledge under your belt, like your job for the next 5 years, say 5 years, is to shut up and listen really, really well. And he was like, no, 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 no. I've got some training. I've got some experience. And we were like, I don't. so. Um, and anyway, it was just a very clear conversation of like, I'm not calling him a narcissist specifically, but just that
Sure.
that idea of, no, I came here for the glory of God to fix all the problems, and I've got some experience in training and really no deep engagement. Like whether you're involved in humanitarian work or government diplomacy or
Yep.
faith-based stuff, like you are interfering in people's lives in really profound and deep ways that I don't think, at least missionaries, I don't think they take seriously. Like this is a real interference. And then you got to do some due diligence before you start messing with some of that stuff.
That's a really good point. Of course, one of the things I've also wrestled with, I worked for the CIA, so there you go. So that, especially the history, which during my time there, I wrote a post about this. So if anybody, I do a full excavation of the whole similarities and differences between the CIA and mission work. But obviously the history is really, really bad in Africa, which we as a, institution, we read books about that, and, there was more of a, honest look at all of that. My time there, US policy was much less interfering. Although you're right, any of it's very an interference, and it was more benign, democracy and all of that kind of thing. But it is an interference, and that is, that's a good way of putting it, and a really good point. And certainly for us, like as an analyst, I saw my job as trying to understand and know everything that I could to teach our policymakers, So my particular, I'm not defending myself necessarily. Many people can have and can find fault with my participation in the American, you know, the American project overseas. But um, you know, my job was to learn all I could and try to communicate that. And it's a little bit of a different mindset. But obviously my cohorts were do, recruiting assets and things like that, which is actually not unlike conversion, not unlike evangelism. You're trying to convert people to join your team.
Yeah.
So
Oh, totally.
there's a lot of ironies. There's a lot of ironies there for me
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. You're not with them anymore.
No, no, no. I left about a year ago. So,
Okay.
and I learned a lot. The other ironic thing is, I learned far more about Africa working for the American government than I did living in Africa with a missionary family.
Interesting.
Yeah, and going to a missionary school, we didn't have any African history. We didn't have any African literature. We didn't learn anything about nobody. And I still find this among my friends who are missionaries. Very few of them are actually really engaged at all in what's going on in the country, except as it affects them. Like if there's going
Mhm.
to be political instability or whatever, then they might know a little something, but they don't have a real understanding of the issues or the history or
The
the
artist.
current. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like, why do you need to know that? You're just here to tell people about Jesus, right? And it's like, well, um
Yeah. I also just feel like how is that a real life or a meaningful life? It's a real life,
yes,
obviously, but like if
exactly.
you're gonna live in a place and then, a musical band is coming through and they're gonna play a concert, like go to the concert. Who are you listening to? Who's the local author that's doing the event? Like I mean, that's my stuff is kind of this artistic stuff. Or actually, I was also into sports. I started a girls running club and like got to interview the Djiboutian Olympians and went to the airport to see them off on like really caring about, my kids would actually wrestle with when the Olympics were on. Who are we supposed to cheer for? Well, of course, the Djiboutians, I shouldn't say of course, but they're never going to win. The girls always came in last. The female sprinters, they're always the last one. But cheer for them because like that's our friend actually. And
Yeah.
and I think it's really sad to not engage in the place you are. So even coming back to the US, we realized like we're going to move back to Minnesota, back to New Brighton. Where's the school board? Where's
Mm.
the
Wow,
food
yeah.
shelf? Like, how are we going to,
Yeah.
what's the things here that are happening? That's
Mm.
been really fun. And
Hmm.
I'm still learning, definitely still learning. But, going to the local author events and cheering for the athlete or whatever, it just to me feels like a more rich way of being abroad. Like, why go if you're not going to love what you're immersed in?
Yeah. Huh, that's such a neat thing that you said about like coming back to the US and having that same mindset. And I wish someone, I wish you would have could go back and tell, 17, 18-year-old me, you know, that because I think a lot of MKs come back. Of course, they're in grief, so grief can often be expressed through, you know, anger and rejection of things in the new life or whatever. But um I would have really benefited from that mindset back then, to be like, this is there's new things to learn and this is a new culture to figure out and a new, be present where you are.
One thing that's been
Um
really fun to watch with my kids at college is they had that mindset of like, oh my gosh, it's snowing. What do you do with snow? And then a couple of their friends, my girls' friends in particular, were like, wait, you don't know snow? Like, let's go sledding. And my kids were like, wow, this is amazing. And so all the Minnesotan kids who are so sick of sledding by that point, they just thought it was super fun to take these kids who didn't have the experience. And so they were introducing them to Target. I mean, my kids had been to Target when we'd come back to the US, but not as adults. And so it was really fun to kind of have them say to find kind of cultural mentors, Minnesotan cultural mentors of how do I do this kind of thing. Um, yeah, that's been fun to watch. And I think it's helped them to thrive. And actually, our church in Djibouti, we were part of a public, there's three official church buildings, the Catholic, Protestant, and Ethiopian Orthodox. So we participated in the Protestant one. It was mostly just a whole conglomeration of Africans from all over the continent, primarily. Um, and when we left, our last day there, um, the president of the parish council prayed for my husband and I. We were the ones left in the country still, and like sent us back to the U.S. on behalf of representing this church in the U.S. And so, kind of all those things of like coming back here felt like re-engaging in a new place with the prayers of this church from there sending us here and um, trying to figure out like what's the local favorite food. And I don't know, it's not always been good or not always been easy, but it's been an adventure, I guess I'll say that.
Well, it sounds like a healthy mindset, a growth mindset, as they say, where you're curious and, wanting to learn and, not bringing all of your presumptions and, things, mindset of things should be this way and this is how I want things and being more open to how they actually are.
Yeah.
So I don't know that coming or going. I'm not sure that missionaries and MKs always have that mindset. I certainly didn't. Coming back, I was very bitter and angry to
About
be
being
where I was. So yeah, but I'm obviously that was a long time ago. So
here.
I'm
Did your family move back with you or did you come for university?
no, I came by well with my sister. Yeah, and then to a we went to a tiny, like a very small Southern Baptist. My parents were Southern Baptist college in the middle of West Texas, which is a is a rather God for. I mean, it's full of God. It's full of religion. Like it's very evangelical, but um, in terms of beauty, natural beauty, it's a
Mm,
rather God-forsaken place and very culturally, you know, yeah, not very enriching in my mind. But
mm,
my sister did a much better job of kind of like you described, of kind of like, oh, like she would go out two-stepping, like that's what they did. And so she got involved in things and sort of got out there. But I was so deep in grief for so long that I just had no interest in anything. I didn't want to be there. I didn't make any friends. I put like zero effort into my life. Well, I got married at 19 to another MK, and that was terrible. So, and then I got divorced years later. I those were very dark years for me. Now I know that it was grief, and I wish someone would have clearly, sort of labeled that for me and sort of helped walk me through that. Certainly prevented me from making a major life decision in the midst of it. But I don't think now I feel like the understanding of third culture kids and all of that, there's a lot more support and
Mhm.
better guidance than when I was when I was that age, which was a long time ago now. So I do think
Yeah.
it's better now. But one of the things that I was sort of dismayed about when I started interviewing people of all ages, as I had this sort of assumption that people young, millennial and Gen Zs, because I knew there had been improvements made in child protection and in sort of reentry as they call it, and supports for missionary kids and awareness of their needs and experiences and all of those things. I knew there had been like real improvements. But I was dismayed to see that a lot of the experience still carried forward for them. That really made me sad. And it made me think that some of what we experience, like the grief, for instance, that was the most universal thing, that it's kind of baked into the cake. Like if you it's a unique thing, even among third culture kids, like diplomats kids, they move around a lot, and so I don't think that they get really attached to a single place or culture. And then there's sort of the bubble that they really stay in and kind of moves with them, and they are kind of part of a culture. And then maybe they come to DC and end up working in this same, bubble here. So I don't think it's quite the same as a missionary kid who is raised their entire childhood basically in one place, and really identifying with that, and then not like they don't get to keep it. Like it was never meant to be permanent.
Mhm.
And I think
Mhm.
that's a unique kind of grief. I always use the illustration of like when a family, let's say a Kenyan family immigrates to the United States. That's a permanent move. And the kids enmesh. Like, let's say they bring over a 6-year-old. Well, within a year or two, that 6-year-old's gonna be speaking with an American accent, and then that 6-year-old's going to be, graduate from high school an American. And maybe they'll have interest and some fondness for, their family back in Kenya, or, some identity that they sort of incorporate into their identity. But they've basically they're an American. They sound like an American. There's some differences, but they're basically, and always think the accent thing is so telling. Like MK's my accent's an American accent. Well, like, oh, you were raised in Kenya. Why don't you have an accent? It's like, well, I was raised to be an American in
Mhm.
Kenya. I was not raised, we did not move, we did not immigrate.
Right.
I was raised to leave. I was
Right.
raised there to leave. And
Wow.
that's very different, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, that is a powerful way to put it. And to say it was never meant to be permanent is also really telling. Because there's been debate over the terms immigrant, expat, refugee, and some of the racial tinges on those too. But
Yes.
expat isn't meant to be permanent. It is different. And people, there's no expectation that my kids would go back there to work as or go to
Right.
university there. You're right. Like it is a very different thing. And that's
Or if they
really
did go back, they wouldn't go back to be part of that, to be part of that. They would go back to basically be an expat.
Right,
It's
right.
very, and I totally, obviously I understand. Like I understand why it's better for me. There's more opportunity in the United
Mhm.
States to be, of course I'm going to go back to America. There's very, there's a million Kenyans who would love to just come be an American. So it's not a rational thing. Rationally, I know, like, obviously, I'm way better off as an American, but that's not what's in your heart, right?
Doesn't have to be rational. No, it's definitely an emotional thing. Yeah. Yeah. Even kids like mine or like you who spend, I mean, my kids spent their entire life in one place, essentially. The twins lived in Somaliland for less than a year. After that, it was all Djibouti. And we only came back to the US. We came back in the summer, almost every summer, not always, but almost every summer. We always came back to Minnesota. So they do have roots here. Both of our families live here,
Yeah,
and we
that's
always would
good.
come to the same place, to the same, they had even friends in Minnesota. But they have compared their experience with other TCKs who either lived abroad for maybe 2 or 3 years at a formative age or multiple different locations, whether they're diplomats or whatever. And they have said, my kids feel different. My kids have expressed they feel different, and other people have said to them, you seem different to me because of that,
Yeah,
because of those roots that are, it is a different thing. And the third culture kid framing of it is really helpful, but it doesn't quite capture all the complexities within that of the different kind of TCK you are.
sure. Yeah,
Even at the boarding school, my kids said we don't like this is a missionary kid boarding school, but they were like, I don't we don't feel like that because dad's a professor. And so there was this even
yeah.
within that small world, there's a kind of weird thing. It's it's tricky. And yeah, I'm so thankful that there's more resources now, but you're right, like the grief I think is probably something that it doesn't go away. I don't know how to think about all of that, but it's just part of yeah. I'm glad that at
Yeah.
least there's ways to talk about it now.
I mean, every life has its ups and downs, That's, the
Yeah.
other thing is like there's no perfect life. There's no I don't know. I'm not saying, the other thing people misunderstand me is I'm not saying like this is people shouldn't live like this or they shouldn't,
Mhm.
shouldn't go. What I was trying to do is more, again, puncture the narcissism for the American church about it.
Yeah.
Like try to get through that. Um, and if, one of the aspects of the narcissism is the idea that we have to go do this. Like we have to do that. Like we can't rely on these other people to like we have to go. And it's like, there may be reasons to go and there may be tremendous blessings to go and there may be reasons you want to go and but to try to kind of get through to like maybe you don't have to, maybe you're not the heroes that you think you are.
Maybe the Kenyan Christians have some thriving churches and some deep theology.
Oh, Kenya is like even growing up there, I was like, this what is this place? It's like 1950s America, what I imagined it to be. Like all the matatus, what we call them, had like little Bible verses on them, like it was just like everywhere you looked was like all the politicians were Christians. Of course, they were also brutal dictators in my day, and horrible people, but hey, they were all good Christians. I went to church with I did a church service with President Moy. We were at the church and he came to visit. He was very devout. We were told he was a very good Christian. He was actually grew up in a missionary's home. Meanwhile, he's like murdering people and so on and so forth. So so it's like um yeah, so it's a very Christian place, but it has some of the same dissonance as
Mhm.
American Christianity.
Mhm.
Anyway, I'm kind of rambling about that.
That's
Well, is there anything else you wanted to talk about?
I feel like we could probably have
We
so
could
many.
probably talk forever about it.
Yeah.
Well, while I
Yeah.
have you here, I mean, just like speak a little bit more about what is going on. What we were talking a little bit before I started recording, but what is going on in Minnesota where you are, and what can people, I don't know if there's anything people can do to help or just anything you want to share with regards to what's going on right now.
Sure, thanks for asking. I was away for the last 10, 11 days in Djibouti. And so it was really hard to leave because things had just happened. Like Renee Good had just been murdered. And then I got back, and the day after I got back, Alex
Mm.
Preddy was murdered. And just like couched between this was my experience in Djibouti, where I had gone to deal with some kind of intense stuff on that side of the ocean, including even arrests and beatings and deportations on that side. It was just
Yeah, yeah,
in my body.
yeah.
That's just a personal experience of it. But then I was really thankful because while I was gone, actually, my publisher contacted me and asked if I would write about it. And so it felt like at least I can do this is what I do, I write. And so I can at least do that from an airplane. And so I did some interviews while I was on layovers in Paris and London and calling people, and wrote a piece for Plow Publishing,
Oh,
which
I love Plow. I wrote a piece for Plow not too
did
long
you?
ago.
Oh,
Yeah, I
great.
love them. Did you have
Absolutely.
Katrin Kuiper? Do you know her by
Yeah, yeah,
chance?
yeah. Yeah, I didn't have her for this one, but I've had her for different projects.
She's 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 a friend. So,
Oh,
yeah.
fantastic. I love it. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm a huge fan of Plow.
Yeah, yeah. They're great.
Um,
I'll look
and
for
so,
it.
okay, yeah, that that was helpful for me to because I was talking to people about what are you doing on the ground? What they wanted to know what are people doing to love each other? And like, I don't know, just even since I've been back, there is the framing of legality and law and order um and just to say like I believe that nations have the right to have a border and to have laws about that border. They just need to be regulated and clear, and ours needs some deep reformation. But what is happening here is not, in my opinion, it's not just about immigration and borders. It's fear and um, it's terrorizing American citizens and people who are here legally with refugee status or asylum. Like there just seems to be no. I, the it seems almost irrational, and the way that the fear is just rampant.
Mm.
People. I have Somali friends who haven't left their house in weeks and they're getting groceries delivered. They've canceled gym memberships. Their kids aren't going to school. And they're American citizens, but they're just so afraid because people are getting picked up anybody. Yeah, so anyway, that's like the negative side is probably the headlines are easy to see, but behind the headlines is like just a mass movement of people loving each other,
Yes.
regardless of their politics. But just saying like it is not okay for you to be
Mm.
afraid of your house, and I will bring you food, and I will drive your kid to school, and I will even just right now this afternoon, I drove my daughter to a church where they were doing a food packing, and then she went out to deliver to some houses. On my way home, I saw a city bus. It's just a small, small story, but there's so many like this. A city bus stopped at the stop, and a guy was standing there with a whistle. And so that's kind of a people with whistles are like just looking out for ice, and so they'll whistle if ice is around. Um, and there was another bus across the street that some people from the one bus were going to get into. And the guy with the whistle like looked and then kind of ushered them into the other bus, like just sort of protecting them on their way to the bus. I'm assuming the people were going to work, but just that kind of thing is happening where strangers are looking out for each other. And yeah, it's weird, it's intense, it's exhausting, and it's amazing to see what people are doing to come together and really practically loving each other. Okay, here's the thing about Christianity. In the American church, we have not learned, the white American church, we've not learned the cost of showing mercy.
Mm.
We just think it's easy to believe some stuff in our head about our religion or our faith and have some ideas about showing mercy. But when it comes down to actually doing it, there's a cost, and it's financial and it's time and it's emotional. And I think I see the Christian community, some of them really embracing that. Like this is what we do. There's a cost and we're going to pay it and we're going to come alongside these people. Um, and so that's something that we need to learn from other communities that aren't the white evangelical church. And I think some are learning that. I'm just rambling right now. I
No,
don't know.
no, it's so beautiful. And that's what I've been taking away from what I'm watching. I mean, though obviously the horror of it, but then it's just like it's so beautiful and it's so honestly it's so un-American in a good way. It's un-American in a bad way and it's un-American in a good way because we're so, independent and like we don't want to need anybody. We don't want them to need us. We don't, every man and woman's an island and all of that. And we're so proud of our individualism. And then you
Mm,
see like, okay, but then when difficulties come, we can we can be better than that. And there's just so much meaning in it. I quoted a pastor that I just found, I'm reading all these accounts on Facebook and what have you. Um, and this pastor in Minnesota, I don't know what denomination, but she said that she every day she was like, anxious and full of fear and all that. And every day she was falling in love with her community. She used the term falling in love. And that just was like that just like really stuck with me, that that feeling of deep connection and almost it's a transcendent experience,
yeah.
where you're when you fall in love with someone, and she's falling in love with her entire community and with all of her neighbors like on a daily basis. And I just thought that was so beautiful. I mean, certainly that's what it looks like from the outside for sure. So
Yeah, hearing you say that, it just makes me emotional because it's true. Like there are lawyers who are working so many hours pro bono. There are midwives going to homes to deliver babies because they're afraid to go to the hospital, or people nurses who are spending time in the NICU because the parents can't come in to see their babies. Like it's so devastating and it's so incredible what people are doing.
yeah, it gives me a lot of hope for the country writ large. If people could just uh, to me, the frustrating thing about the last 10 years is that people just, they need to wake up. They don't really realize a lot of people do realize, unfortunately, and they've decided this is what they want. But then a lot of other people are just living these sort of mindless, decadent sort of lifestyles, and they're worried about the getting the next iPhone or whatever. And they don't realize what's going on. And it's just like you want to just shake people. But to me, like I look at Minnesota and it's like, okay, they get it. They realize because they can't avoid it anymore.
You can't go
And
out and not see it. I mean, okay, actually, yesterday I was doing a call with four other women in Minnesota with someone else, talking about what's happening. And I had said, actually, I haven't seen any ICE cars. This was just yesterday. Um, Granted, I was out of the country for a long time, and so that, of course, I didn't see them. But sure enough, this morning on my run, half mile from my house, there they were. And so you cannot, if you go out, you can't avoid it, and that makes
yeah.
you have to decide what is happening, how am I feeling about it, what am I going to do about it.
Wow, that's a good way of putting it too. Like you're forced to decide.
Mhm.
Just even in your heart and your feelings about it. And
Mhm.
maybe your heart decides for you in how you react. Maybe that's also what's going on, the just the feeling of being threatened or menaced, or just the fear, maybe that's an instinctual thing, and that's the decision for some people who may have not politically sort of gotten it before.
Yeah, what's
So
in your face, and yeah.
yeah, so well, thank you so much. I really enjoyed talking to you and meeting you. And again, I'm really sorry if I hurt your feelings, and I really appreciate if I I really appreciate you reaching out to me, and with such a gracious spirit. And I think it's definitely not comfortable. And we've all been there. And again, people, I confront this all the time because a lot of people, I'm in a more liberal Christian space now. And so the fact that I worked for CIA can become an issue for people. And so I understand, like, it's not fun to sort of be confronted with that, with sort of association, or if someone has like an issue with one of your associations or something like that. But the way you responded was just so gracious and humble, and I knew you were someone that I wanted to know for real, and not just through your writing.